Is the I-70 killer the same killer as the I-65 killer? Well, we're going to be talking about that and a little more on today's Charlie Crimebuster. You're also going to get an opportunity to hear from a survivor of the killer or killers, according as you see it. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more. Yep, on today's Charlie Crimebuster, what some people are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals interviewed and participating in this show, and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster or Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Charlie Crimebuster, where today I'm going to tell you my take on the possibility that the same person did the murders on the I-65 killings that did the murders on the I-70 killings. Now, there is some controversy, even among law enforcement, about whether it's the same person or not. But first, let's take time to say hi to any and all the new listeners on the program. Welcome aboard the Charlie Crime Train. Hey, we love you guys also that hang around every week and take in the podcasts. And by the way, as we always do, we urge you to reach out with a shout out. You can reach me, Charlie Crimebuster, at gmail.com. Charlie Crimebuster at gmail.com. You can ask questions. You can make suggestions about the type of podcast you'd like to hear from us about. And you can even make objections. Yep, you can disagree. It is a safe place right here at Charlie Crimebuster. Also, if you'd like to support the podcast, go over to peacemakernetwork.com. There you can become a badge, BADGE supporter for just a few dollars a month. You can help us help the real heroes of today. Oh no, not the ones you see on TV that entertain us, but the real ones. The real heroes of law enforcement, first responders, and of course the brave men and women of military. You can read about how we support these brave men and women over at peacemakernetwork.com. Now, we will, of course, put these links in our show notes. All you have to do is click on it. Hey, speaking of the military, during this time of this particular release of this particular podcast, we know that the world is in trouble, especially in the Middle East. Started a little over a week ago, the worst terrorist attack in the history of the nation of Israel. Now, I do keep telling you from time to time with the real-life crime stories that we talk to you about that there is real evil out there. Well, my friend, it certainly roared its head Saturday a week ago. There were literally innocent children and babies whose heads were cut off. There was the killing of innocent men and women, teens and children by a terrorist group. And just like we had our own 9/11 here in America, now Israel has their own 9/11. And not only were Jewish people killed, but some of those people that were killed were Americans. There were over 150 people that were taken hostage, including about 15 American citizens. Now, regardless of what you think politically, this is evil, pure and simple. And as the world stood with us on 9/11, so you and I should keep these precious families who lost loved ones and are anxiously and fearfully awaiting news of their own loved ones, we should keep them in our thoughts and prayers. You know, this also would be a good time to remind you that the murders that we've been covering in this series all happened to someone's loved ones as well. People who were hard-working people, doing what millions of people do every day, going to their jobs, providing for their families. And little did they know that their loved ones, that person who walked out of the door going to work, would not be walking back through the door to greet their loved ones. This is why we usually try to say something about these victims as we report on them week by week. They are real people. They have family members that are devastated by their deaths. Having someone killed by a criminal is something that you never, ever really get over for the rest of your life. The I-65 murders. Now, some of those murders were clerks of the Days Inn, and sometimes that series is called the Days Inn Murders. But again, there are some investigators who believe that those Days Inn murders and the murders in Texas, they believe that that's the same murderer who killed on the I-70 murders. Now, there are at least 2 people who survived the killer in the Texas killings and live to talk about it. And right now, today, I'm going to let you hear from one of those victims. Her name is Vicki Webb, and she is from Houston, Texas. Here is what Vicki had to say about that terrible ordeal.
Going on vacation that afternoon and helping some friends move to Colorado. So my car was packed, a little distracted, got to my store a little bit late. All around just a feels-good day. A person, short guy, I will always say looked like a jockey, walked into the store and really just started talking. He was very pensive. He was looking at the 2 windows. There was 2 side windows. The front was windowed. He was very much looking out those. Never really got close, to me before he shot me. He was acting very nervous, but I was overriding that. I was leaving. I was closing up for 4 o'clock that day, going on vacation. So my mind was certainly not there. Now my mind certainly would be different, but at the point, no. He was acting strange. I've been around people all my life. He was acting strange. Who thinks anything else besides this is a strange guy? He had said something about a frame that he wanted. He pointed at the frame. I'd had it in my hand, was walking back. I never heard him come up on me, never heard a thing, heard a very loud pop behind me, and then was looking at the side of an armoire, and I realized I was falling very slowly down the side of the armoire. He came back over to me. He rolled me over. He pulled my legs down just a little bit, so I was laying flat. He took off my trousers, which I didn't know. And then he came up over me. My breathing was so shallow, you wouldn't have detected it anyway. I believe that when he rolled me over, that actually helped me. My breathing got a tiny bit better. It was a little easier for me to breathe. But he came up over me, and I will say, although I cannot be sure, I will say that he put the gun back to my forehead. He went click. I really thought his gun misfired. Again, don't know that for sure. It was just a click. Wasn't the same pop as behind me. It was a click. So, and he chuckled. So, he's a very sick man.
Well, there you have it. Words from Vicki Webb. She was at the alternative gift shop there in Houston, Texas. And she was killed, or shot rather, much the same way as these other victims that we've been telling you about all this time. Now, there are some similarities here. She was shot in the back of the head. The gun that they identified in the I-70 killings, by the way, my friend, was a special type of German-made .22. And oftentimes, get this, it would misfire. Just saying, another factor for you to keep in mind as you consider this killing with the I-70 killings. Now, one big thing we do know for a fact is that the 65 killer has been identified. Yep, he's been identified. And it's time to reveal the identity of the I-65 killer. Now, ballistic evidence from the scenes of the Gill and Gilbert murders match. That means that they most likely was killed by the same suspect. That's what Detective Fiffield said. And the Indiana State Police Laboratory, now hang on to your hats, they later matched DNA evidence linking the Heath and Gilbert murders to the Columbus, Indiana case. In 2019, the FBI's Gang Response Investigative Team, they were asked to help, and that brought some fresh eyes to the case. Now, at the same time, technology has now advanced. That gave investigators new ways to approach the murders. And one of the methods that the officials used was, of course, what we now call today investigative genealogy. The use of DNA analysis, genealogy research, and historical records to search for leads. And my friend, further investigation and lab testing of the evidence by the Indiana State Laboratory? Yep, it led to a positively identification of a suspect. His name is Greenwell, Harry Edward Greenwell. And it is, my friend, a 99.9999% positive match. It is this scientific breakthrough that ultimately led to the identification of the I-65 killer, Harry Edward Greenwell. Greenwell had an extensive criminal history, and he has been, as a lot of these guys are, in and out of prison. The detective noted that Greenwell had escaped from jail twice, and, get this, was known to travel frequently in the Midwest. Now, police do not know the fact of his official cause of death, because you see, Greenwell is dead now. They did note that an obituary for him stated that he had died of cancer. And yet, even though he's dead, this investigation isn't over. You see, investigators have long believed that there have been rapes, murders, robberies, or assaults that have not yet been connected to the investigation. And one of the victim's daughter, Kim Gilbert Wright, which is Jeannie Gilbert's daughter, she said at the news conference that the announcement her family had been aching to hear for 3 decades, that announcement was, quote, unquote, overwhelming. She went on to say, in our case, we'll never know what the killer was thinking. We'll never know the why of his actions. So, just a little more about this monster killer. Harry Edward Greenwell was born in Louisville, Kentucky, to Paul and Dorothy Greenwell. And on January the 17th, 1963, Greenwell, he was arrested for an armed robbery in Louisville. He was sentenced on April the 12th, 1963, to 2 years in the prison along with 5 years probation. Then on February the 23rd, 1965, he was again arrested in Jefferson County, Kentucky, on a sodomy charge. And in 1969, he was paroled from the Kentucky State Penitentiary. Now, on April the 28th of 1978, Greenwell's wife died of a house fire in Vernon County, Wisconsin. Maybe they ought to look at that one again, too, huh? Now, shortly thereafter, Greenwell, he met a 39-year-old single mother who had previously been in an abusive relationship. After some time, the couple married. Greenwell, who had an adopted daughter from a previous marriage, fathering a son of his own. Then in 1982, Greenwell was once again arrested and sentenced to prison for burglary. That's in Iowa. During his arrest, get this, he escaped from custody and he was recaptured twice. He did serve in the state penitentiary of the Kentucky State Prison until his release in 1983. Now, here's a biggie. Listen to this. At some point, Greenwell found employment as a railroad worker. He worked on the tracks, get this, across the Midwest. Now, this is a clue as to why he may have gone from place to place in these killings. It is a clue that some investigators say links him to both these series of killings. So the real question is, were these killings that we've been talking about the past couple of weeks, the I-70 killings and the I-65 killings, were they done by the same man? And if they were, that man has been identified. But let me also say something here. Many of you are probably thinking, the Texas murders, you see, they mostly were in hotels, but not all of them, my friend. There were a couple of those Texas murders that we did not have time to go over last week. One of them occurred at the Emporium Antique Store in Fort Worth, Texas. That was the death of Mary Ann Glasscock, who was 35 years of age. And then on September the 25th, 1993, there was Amy Vest, 22 years of age. And then, of course, we have that one that you just heard about, Vicki Webb, who survived that. She was left for dead, but she survived the attack. She worked at the Alternatives gift shop. So all the Texas murders were not motels and hotels. The question is, did this killer evolve from the 80s to the 90s, the late 80s into the early 90s? Did that killer evolve? Did that killer change some, but not all, of the MO? Well, we're going to look at that in a moment. But now it is time for us to take a break from the darkness of this story and to laugh about another crazy crook. And interesting enough, there is at least one liquor store killing that is tied to our murder or murders, according to how you believe whether the same one did it or not. It is tied there because it happened so close to one of the earlier murders in the I-70 killings in Indiana. It was Terre Haute, Indiana. But this one that I'm going to share with you now is definitely not tied to it, but rather it is tied to our crazy crook stories that we tell every week. And this one, believe you me, you will not have any problem putting it into that category. Now, we all know that liquor stores are prime targets. And in May, there was a man who robbed a liquor store with a shotgun. And I guess being around all that liquor was just a little too tempting for our crazy crook. He told the man, as he pointed the shotgun at him, to give him a bottle of liquor on the back counter. Now here, my friend, is where it gets really, really crazy. The clerk refused. The clerk gave him the money, but he refused to give him the liquor. Now get this, you really can't make this stuff up. He refused to give him the liquor because he did not know if the man was of the legal drinking age of 21. Now hang in there. It gets even crazier. Because, my friend, after the clerk refused, well, the robber quickly whipped out his driver's license to prove the fact that he was old enough. And then the clerk, satisfied, and, of course, putting the name and address to memory, gave the robber the bottle of booze. And the robber left the store, happy with money and liquor, smiling himself all the way, that is, until the Popo showed up at the address listed on the license, arrested him. So, my friend, this crazy crook who showed his driver's license to the clerk he had just robbed is indeed Charlie Crimebuster's crazy crook of the week. Now back to our main focus. Let's review the similarities of the I-70 murders first. Let's talk about the MO, the pattern of behavior of the I-70 murder. Now, with the exception of the Texas murders, all of them were done by a .22 firearm. Now, some of the Texas murders was done with such a weapon, but not all of them. And the victims were all young, petite women with long, dark hair. Of course, that was with the exception of the one male who was shot from behind. He had long hair, was bending over, had an earring. And most investigators believe that he was mistakenly taken as a woman because the killer only saw the back of this particular victim. Now, they were all shot in back of the head, and the I-70 killer, well, he picked small specialty shops where there was not much traffic. And all these places had very little money. Very little money was taken. In fact, some money was left behind. So it is not really considered to be the main motive for the killing, that is the money. It's mainly believed that he killed because he liked to kill. Now, they were also mostly in strip malls, and they were at a slow period of the day. And keep in mind, this is important, there was no sexual assault in the I-70 murders. Now, the one task force thought, due to the time of the assaults and the killings and the Midwest geographical locations, well, some of the task force, it thought that these killings could be linked to the I-65 killings. While some of the investigators in Texas, they were not quite that much convinced. So now, I want to take a time to look at the I-65 killings. Well, the killer, he did target women, and he did shoot them in the back of the head. Now, he also hit at a time when there was there were little people around. So the question is, were these murders done by the same person? Now, speaking about the I-70 killers, well, Detective Brad Ramsey, he said this case needs to be solved. And he went on to say that Henry Edward Greenwell, the newly identified I-65 killer, is a new lead that they're looking into, the I-70 task force. He, of course, as we said, is accused of killing these women along Interstate 65 in the 80s. This was just right before the first murder by the I-70 killer. Now, the sketch of them is similar. The I-65 killer did target women. He did shoot them in the head with a handgun. So there's definitely those similarities. That's what Kim Rhodes, a detective with the St. Charles Police Department, said. She went on to add that the I-65 killer is a little older than what they thought the I-70 killer would be, but goes on to say that's not enough grounds to dismiss him as a suspect. So what do you think? Now, in just a moment, I'm going to give you my verdict. My verdict as if the same person that killed in the I-65 killings and the Texas killings is this the same as the I-70 killings. I want to do that in just a moment. But now it's time to take a moment to do what we call our public assistance portion. We're going to give you a brief takeaway to alert you to a crime that's happening right now in the present. These crimes happened 30 years ago or more. But these are crimes that are happening right now in America and around the world. And here is our producer, James Buckland, with a human trafficking report, a terrible trend in crime that all of us need to be on the lookout for. Share with us, James, about this important information.
Thank you, Charlie Crimebuster. Just this week, the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the Department of Justice Office of Justice Programs released the human trafficking data collections activities for 2023. Now, this report describes the Bureau of Justice Statistics activities during 2022 and 2023 to collect data and report on human trafficking as required by the Combat Human Trafficking Act of 2015. Now, this report details ongoing and completed efforts to measure and analyze the nationwide incident of human trafficking, to describe characteristics of human trafficking victims and offenders, and to describe criminal justice responses to human trafficking offenses. The report provides information on human trafficking suspects referred to and prosecuted by U.S. attorneys, human trafficking defendants convicted and sentenced to federal prison, and admissions to state prison for human trafficking. Here's the highlights. A total of 2,027 persons were referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office for human trafficking offenses in the fiscal year 2021, a 49% increase from the 1,360 persons referred to in the year 2011. The number of persons prosecuted for human trafficking more than doubled from 2011 to 2021. 729 persons to 1,672 persons respectively. Of the 1,197 defendants charged in federal court for human trafficking offenses in the fiscal year 2021, 92% were male and 60% were white. Of the 201 defendants charged with peonage, slavery, forced labor, and sex trafficking in the fiscal year 2021, 77% were male and 58% were black. At year-end 2021, 1,657 persons were in the custody of a state prison serving a sentence for human trafficking offenses. If you would like more information about the Bureau of Justice Statistics, please reach out to them at bjs.ojp.gov. That's bjsojp.gov.
Thank you, James, for that information. Now, 2021 is the latest statistics that we can find so far. You see, there's just so many of these events happening today, it's hard for the government to keep up with them. But you can find all of the current information and a lot more information on our show notes. We're going to give you a link that James mentioned there so you can get up on human trafficking, a terrible, terrible trend that all of us need to be on the lookout for. So now, as I said last week, I'm going to tell you my opinion on whether these killings were done by the same person. By the way, I'd love to hear your own opinion. You can reach out with a shout-out. Email me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Now, let me say, if the murders were done by the same person, then the M.O. would have to evolve. You see, in the earlier murders, the murders were very sloppy. He left DNA. He sexually assaulted. He raped. He showed himself. He took a great risk, by the way, in abducting one of the victims. There was a much more chance of him being caught as he took this victim away from the scene. There was even a possibility that there was a description of the vehicle that he was driving that was released. I'm, of course, referring back to last week's podcast. If you want to get caught up, go to charliecrimebuster.com, hit on Charlie Shows. Now think with me about the M.O. of the I-70 killings now. The I-65, sloppy. This killer was much more organized, not as sloppy. And it appeared that he would actually take time to park his vehicle away from the murderers and walk to and from his vehicle. A good way not to give up a description of the vehicle. The question is this: did he realize his mistake earlier and then improve on his killing MO? And he did not leave the type of DNA with the I-70 that could easily be collected. It was the 90s, and there was some talk about DNA. Could he have read about it and just changed his MO? And the weapons, did he change them over? We do know that a .22 was used in both of the murder sprees, a .22 type weapon. But not always was a .22 used in the I-65 killings. Did he change over to weapons to try to keep his identity hidden? Or maybe the fact that we know at least one time we heard from this victim who survived it that there was a misfire. Did this misfire cause him to change weapons? Could this man who murdered in the I-65 killings be the same man that murdered in the I-70 killings? Well, here's my take on it. I do not believe that it was the same man who killed in the I-70 killings that killed in the I-65 killings. While there are some investigators who perhaps disagree, and maybe you disagree, I just don't believe it. Now, he could have been the same one with the two specialty shops that we read about in Texas, but I doubt that because that was not the same gun that was used in the I-70 killings. Now, the basic reason, though, I believe it is not because of the change in weapons. The basic reason I believe they're not the same is the lack of a sexual assault on the I-70 killings. You see, this is something that usually doesn't change with serial killers. The I-65 killer was sexually drawn not only to the violence, but also to the sexual assaulting and raping of his victims. Whereas the I-70 killer was not drawn in a sexual way, but he got off on the killing itself. The earlier killings involved a sexual assault. The later ones of the I-65 did not, and that is the fact that I believe that the killers are not the same. In fact, if we really think about it, the only thing that really tied the I-65 to the I-70 killers was that the victims were women and they were shot in the back of the head. My friend, there's nothing unusual about such killings. In fact, it's been reported at times that there have been over 300 killers that were roaming about doing those type of killings. So, my friend, this is not an ironclad of a reason to connect the two. Now, unless DNA proves me wrong, and it may, but unless DNA proves me wrong, I do not believe that the same person responsible for the I-65 killings was responsible for the I-70 killings. I believe that person has yet to be identified. So please think with me. If you know someone who fits the description of the I-70 killer. Now, something else about the I-70 killer for you to think about. At least a couple of times, witnesses say they saw this man muttering to himself. Not the I-65, the I-70. He was talking to himself. Now, this is not encouraging you to turn in every crazy uncle you have or someone who's just going off the deep end mentally. However, if you do know someone who does that and from time to time finds himself traveling in those areas in the 90s, or maybe he just talked a little too much. At first you thought he was just spewing crazy stuff, but he talked to someone who then talked to someone else about those murders. Often that happens, and it hits a nerve with you. Then, my friend, authorities need to hear from you. Particularly if they had reddish hair, were around 5'7" to 5'9". And maybe they even happened to be a collector of guns, a particular .22 gun that had a very long barrel, a German-type gun. You could even hide that under a cloth, and it could be mistaken, as it was by one of the witnesses, as an Uzi gun. Now, if they owned that weapon at one time, traveled around, had reddish hair, something seemed to be a little off to you, then by all means, my friend, contact the St. Charles Police Department at 1-800-800-3510. That's 1-800-800-3510. Now, again, we're going to add that to our show notes as well. By the way, there's a $25,000 reward. But, my friend, do it. Do it because these families need closure and these victims need justice. And as one officer said, my friend, it does not matter that it's been over 30 years. If it is 3 minutes or 3 decades, someone's lives matter. If you know anything, if you saw something, if you know something, then by all means say something. Again, we will have this number of the St. Charles Police Department in our show notes, along with other important information. So until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert. Yep, for the life you save, it may be your very own.